Good morning, everybody. We're very happy to have the session 19 of the 5-day conference, annual conference of the International Emergency Management Society. I'm very happy to welcome all of you. I hope that this will also be an extremely interesting day with contributions and presentations happening on day one. We have actually the session 19 has three presentations. We will have the first presentation by Dr. Mercy Dalila from Kenya. Dr. Mercy Dalila actually has a PhD and currently she is the postdoctoral fellow at the Machakos University. She's researching on fire regimes across several ecosystems. She has a PhD in fire ecology from the University of Tasmania in Australia. And she also holds a joint European MSc in Geoinformation Science from the University of Twente, the Netherlands, and Lund University, Sweden. Her aspiration is to really create a cadre of fire scientists in Kenya and also in the region. In her postdoctoral research work, she's also supporting the different ecosystems and the research related to management of wildfire. I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Murthy and request her to kindly initiate her presentation. Dr. Murthy, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome to my presentation. My name is Mercy Dalila, and my supervisor is Professor Stanley Makindi. We are from Machakos University. The title of my presentation is Wildfire Regime and Preparedness in Mount Kenya Forest under the threat of climate change. So my study area is definitely within Kenya. And just to give you some preview, some idea about Kenya. Kenya is a country located in East Africa with a population of around 50 million people. The country is host to several ecosystems, from the arid and semi-arid areas, which are to the east of the country, and to the more moist areas, which contain the forest to the west of the country. There have been increasing reports of wildfires, and there's anecdotal evidence that suggests that there has been an increase for the last 2 decades. However, that information is scanty and very unreliable because most of it comes from the media, and there isn't really much information from the real fire science side of it. The fires affect several vegetation types, among them the savanna ecosystems, and also the forest, the more Afromontane forest. So it affects various vegetation types within the country. And these are just examples of the fires that have happened. And this one happened in 2019, and the one below a different forest in the same year, 2019. But those are two different forests. The majority of the fires are caused by human activities, with most of them being arson, and mostly either arson or other factors like honey. When you're harvesting honey and they use fire, so that also contributes to the ignition of the fires. So there are several challenges that Kenya faces in fire management. One of them being inadequate resources and funding to conduct the several activities. And capacity here, I mean both in terms of no equipment and also the staff being trained to handle uncontrollable fires. Another challenge is the fire management is not really explicitly defined in existing legislation, and it's only referred to in reference to deliberately setting fire. So it's more a prosecution thing than really fire management thing. As I had indicated, there is really a gap in fire science research, and the few studies have been done by foreign researchers who have the benefit of funding and expertise from their home countries. So that paucity, together with the current situation where the ecosystems and the world is experiencing challenges, increased wildfires, and this is related to climate change. So these two factors, the above two, make the determination of fire regimes in Kenya a bit difficult. So then that informed my decision to do this study. And so the aim of my study was to understand some aspects of fire regimes. And when I talk about fire regimes, I mean the trends, the spatial and the temporal variation of fires. And it's described in terms of seasonality, the intensity of the fire, the size of the fire, and such. And so I wanted to understand some regimes of the fire, and also how the community is prepared for the fires in Mount Kenya forest. So the first aim was to determine the fire severity patterns from the recent fire that happened in 2019. And here I'm using geospatial information tools to determine that. The second objective was to assess historical fire weather for that region and project the future weather for the same region. And the last objective was to determine the level of community preparedness for the uncontrollable fires. So as I indicated, the study area is Mount Kenya forest, which is located at the equator, somewhere in central Kenya. And this is the satellite photo of the location here. The climate here ranges because it's a mountain and it has glaciers on the top. So the temperature ranges from 0 at the top to around 20 degrees Celsius at the base. Rainfall also varies depending on the slope of the mountain. Some slopes have higher rainfall than others. There are a number of threatened species that are located in the forest, some of which are critically endangered. And of interest in this study is the recent fire that happened between February and April of 2019. So I'll be describing the methodology on one objective after the other. So in the first objective on determining the patterns of fire severity from the recent fire, this analysis I've already done that. So I obtained 2 satellite imagery, one for the pre-fire image and another one, the post-fire image. So this is one that has no fire, and then this shows evidence of a fire scar. So from that, I calculated a burn severity index called the delta normalized burn ratio, which now determines the different classes of fire. And if you segment it, you will determine the severity from the unburnt class to the very high severity class. I then conducted fieldwork this year to determine the degree of severity, although this was a few years after the fire. I wanted to determine how the ecosystem, the vegetation is generally recovering. And I validated mapping with the field data that I had collected. So the results from that objective, we found that there were 2 fires. Surprisingly, there were 2. We thought there was one, but then it was a series of fires, with the biggest one covering an extent of around 17,000 hectares. And so this is the one, the big one. And then the smaller one was around 3,000 hectares. The severity varied between the 2 fire grounds, with the Chogoria fire. This is what I'm calling Chogoria. 54% of it showing very high and high severity, while the other fire called Marania is showing around 30% of it as high and very high severity. And there are a series of farms to the north of this fire, and one of the farms was actually responsible for the ignition of the fire, which Marania fire, which is number 2. But surprisingly, in as much as very few fires there are deliberately banned for fire management purposes, most of the fires did not really experience any fire. But from the mapping, you can see some of them showing red areas. All these red areas are the very, very high severity areas. So it could be that in as much as they were not affected by the fire, it could be that the post-fire image, the one that I shown before, if the farms were harvested previously, then the algorithm, the remote sensing algorithm will show that that area has been burnt, yet it's just has been harvested. So those are the confusion with the algorithm. So I haven't really finished that part, but I'm just I've presented the most important parts of that objective. So the second objective was to assess the historical fire weather, and fire weather is the exact weather that affects fire. So there are two of them. I'll explain them later on in the next slide. So this is a current thing that I'm working on right now, and I've extracted the weather data from a modeling framework called ERAS-5, historical data from 1990 to 2020. So that's the baseline data. And from it, I've extracted the fire weather indices. One is Forest Fire Danger Index, which is routinely used in Australia to determine the degree of fire danger on the ground. And this other one is the fire weather index. This is routinely used in Canada for the same purpose. So I wanted to determine which of the two indices is more appropriate for Kenyan ecosystems. And also I will extract HENS index, which is used in North America. And in this case, I'll be using it to determine the degree of fire danger, not on the ground, but in the lower atmosphere. And based on that, the two information, I'll be able to create a map like this one that shows the historical, the current or the historical fire weather, a map of it for the study area. And I said I'll validate those two indices with the weather data from the meteorological station. And then I will compare that historical data with the future weather, and I'll be using the period 2050 to 2080. And the data from the future weather I'll obtain from a coupled project called CMIP5. So it's a global climate model, and I'll determine future weather for that. So at the end, I'll have something like this: historical weather and future fire weather for that region. So it's something that I'm currently working on, so I don't have results to show. And then the last objective was to determine the level of community preparedness for uncontrollable fires. And this I will do by conducting a social survey. I was to do this 2 months ago, but I had to postpone because the elections in Kenya and the elections here can be a little bit erratic. So I had to postpone it to around maybe end of November. And in the survey, I'll be using questionnaires and also interviews for specific people who are more knowledgeable about what I'm determining. And in the survey, I will want to determine the knowledge of the community, local community living around the forest, their knowledge on wildfire, whether they use any traditional knowledge, whether they're involved in fire management, what kind of training they've received, and what are the ways in which we can improve fire management in those areas. From that, and I'll then do a fire awareness campaign, and they'll go to the local media houses with experts, of course, to explain to the community about the importance of fires, both the benefits, both positive and negatives of a fire, and how the community can better prepare for future fires, including this fire safety in their homes. And then using the information from those two, the survey and the awareness, I'll then conduct a training workshop with the help of experts, because I'm not really an expert, where I hope that around 30 community members will be trained on fire prevention and management, generally on issues to do with wildfires. And the possible areas of training are one on detecting fire and reporting about fire. Another area would be about how they can conduct basic firefighting. Another area is on proper communication and coordination during a fire event. Another area is evacuation and fire safety. And this is actually very close to me, because when I was doing my fieldwork in March this year, we were caught up in a fire and the evacuation was not really good. So it's something that I experienced firsthand, and I believe maybe that could be an area in which the people could be trained on. Another area is on how to create the fire breaks so that they can stop the spread of the fire in some of the areas, especially where the community and the farmlands are located. So the implications of this study, because most of these are not only done one part, but the implication of this study is, number one, there'll be a better understanding of fire regime dynamics, the dynamics of fire regimes in Mount Kenya, and hopefully the threats to the ecosystems can be reduced. I think it's still related to what I'm just talking about. I talked about the fire preparedness, and also that the community is prepared to build resilience to climate change impacts. And preparation here is both in terms of they are made aware of the importance of the fire or of the risks associated with the fire. They are trained on fire safety, and then they are also, their livelihoods are protected. So then they can concentrate on building their own livelihoods instead of continuously fighting unexpected fires. And lastly, because there is insufficient fire science information, that the knowledge from this study can be transferred to other people, the collaborators I'm working on, to improve on fire research capacity in Kenya. I would like to acknowledge all these groups of people who have, in one way or another, enabled my project to be a success, and especially the funding institutions that have helped with the little money that they provided. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mercy. This was an extremely useful presentation, and I'm sure that if you had actually also listened into the presentations yesterday on the wildfire risk management by two projects, one fire rest and also fire log, I think it will be useful for you to connect with that network of people participating, because there are large institutions collaborating across the many countries in Europe, and I think there will be a lot of benefits from them understanding about the technology and the artificial intelligence algorithms which you're using, and you can also benefit from interacting with them, because they also have several products and outputs which they are working on, including the platforms. I think it will be useful to collaborate with them. If there are any questions to Dr. Mercy, please feel free to raise them in the Q&A. Any questions, any comments? Dr. Roman Tandlich has said that this is a great presentation. Professor Stanley has also said great work. It's also your work, Professor Stanley. Yes, thank you very much for joining. Would you like to say something, Professor Stanley? Yes, Dr. Roman, please go ahead.
Yes, that was very interesting to hear. Some of the things that you and the tools that you mentioned are also being used in South Africa. So it's great that it's getting continent-wide exposure. I just wanted to quickly ask you, in a broader context of the presentation, what do you see as the main fire disaster risk management challenges in Kenya? Is it a policy dimension? Is it capacitation of the system? Or is it rather predictive and modeling tools like the ones that you were talking about?
I think the first two, policy and the capacity. Actually, the capacity is actually the biggest. But capacity can be solved by the policy issue. If the enabling policy is set out properly, then the capacity can be improved. So it's capacity, but then the policy, the enabling policy framework is actually not existent.
Okay, and in the policy level, would this be at all levels of government, or would it be rather just the national government driving a top-down approach?
I think it's the national government driving it. Yeah, because it has to go through the parliament at some point. So it's whatever I'm research I'm doing is just informing that, because the process is very rigorous and involves parliament and everything. So it's beyond my current research, but I hope whatever I learn from this then can be used to inform that discussion.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. I think you finished in time, and we're very happy that this presentation actually has opened up many issues, many concerns, and I would very strongly recommend that you connect with the platforms, with the other platforms, Fire Rest and Fire Log, which were presented yesterday, and it'll be good to share some of your research ideas, and then also learn from each other, because they're also sharing various events related to wildfire risk management globally, and also convening many interactions and also conducting various surveys.
Okay, thank you.
So I think, it will be good if we can move to the next presentation. We have the next presentation from Dr. Christopher Dixago and Dr. Roman Tandlich on the investigation into local government responses to climate change in Africa. I understand that this presentation is being done by Dr. Christopher Dixago, who is currently employed as a lecturer in political and administrative studies at the University of Botswana in Gaborone. And he was earlier working as a lecturer in public administration at the National University of Lesotho. And Dr. Christopher holds a PhD from South Gujarat University in India in public administration, an MPhil from the University of Cape Coast in development studies, and a BSc from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Development Planning. So he has a multidisciplinary background, and we're very happy to welcome you, Dr. Chris. And because of the Indian connection, because I'm from India, and then we're very happy that you have done your PhD from South Gujarat University. Over to you, Christopher.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm Dr. Christopher Dixago, and I'm presenting from the University of Botswana. And this work was done together with Professor Roman and Dr. Peter Asari Nyama from Ghana. So our topic is local government responses to the impact of climate change in Africa. So we see that the issue of climate change is global. We don't need to even say much about this because we are all, in a way or the other, facing climate change. But however, traditional approaches in handling climate change has been a top-down approach. But now recent thinking has been that it's not good to remain top-down approach, because when climate change hits, the impact gets to those on the regional level, the national level, and also at the local level. So therefore, if climate change is affecting these levels, then you don't want to allow the local people to participate in this in responding to this climate change in terms of adaptation. It becomes more or less like unfair on the part of people, because the people in their own sense have their own way of handling climate change. They have their own, they are not stupid in their own sense, but they have something that they can offer in dealing with climate change. So therefore, there's a need to bring on board or to make sure that the strategies, you integrate them in developing those climate adaptation strategies, so that at the end of the day, their views will be reflected in these things. And all these things are very important because it's going to ensure the sustainability of these adaptation projects. And the sustainability issues will be there. And also we'll see the participation, the full participation of these people. And at the end of the day, I think cost is also going to be reduced if people are involved in this thing. So for the methodology, before I talked about the methodology, this study was purely interested in looking into two things. First, the response strategies that local governments in different countries in Africa are doing to handle climate change, and also the challenges or the barriers that they are facing in doing this. So this then becomes the methodology. This then becomes the objective. Now we are under methodology. First, we did a Google Scholar search, and then out of it, we got 72 readings. We just searched local government and climate change adaptation. It gave us so many works. And we finally, we did a further review to take some out using our own inclusion and exclusion criteria. So this time, the next was to introduce African. So the readings reduced to 30, and out of that, we still went down to sieve and get works from it. So at the end of the day, we were able to get 11 works that were seriously speaking into all that had what we were interested in getting. So now we come to the responses of the responses that local governments are using to deal with climate change. And we looked into responses from 4 different areas. One is institutionalization of climate change at the local level. And we also look into integrating climate change into development plans. And then the next was societal mobilization. And the next was climate change governance learning. So we'll take them one by one, and then we look into them. So we saw that Cameroon, in terms of institutionalization, Cameroon has institutionalized climate change with the enactment of certain national plans. And also, we also saw that South Africa has also institutionalized climate change at the local level. And that is also very good, especially with I think those in the Durban Adaptation Charter, those in the South Africa will understand this better. So they've used this. It's a South African word, I can't pronounce it well, so I'm trying to skip it. So Cameroon's model is such a way that it is well integrated in order that the policy itself give recognition to local institutions like chieftaincy, NGO, and other things, and more or less involve them in the and involve them in climate adaptation strategies and projects. And Tanzania was also, trying to pass a local level, trying to institutionalize climate change at the local level, and that was 2015. So I don't know the current situation now, but I'm sure maybe by now it's also done. So Uganda is also trying to do something. Also, they have institutional. They have a cross sector coordination thing, which is trying to look into local governments to coordinate all activities at the local level, those things, so that at least there'll be some institutions down there to handle climate change issues. So the next is integrating climate change into development plans. How at the local level, how is the integration done? Because the policies are the top there, and how does the local level also try to pick these policies and fuse it into their own strategy? So we're going to see how other African countries are doing. So only a few local governments in South Africa have defined their interest in its strategic policy. So only few local governments in South Africa, they have really defined what their strategic policy with respect to adaptation at the local level. And not all local governments in South Africa have integrated climate change adaptation in their local development plans. So it means that though even in this study, South Africa is the one even doing well or better in terms of this climate change adaptation, but in their own way, they are even struggling. So what about the other or the rest of the other countries, which, for example, those in the West and those in the maybe central, and talk about the others too. So other central parts and those other parts of Africa. So what we see is that all these observations point out that climate change, like integrating climate change into development, is weak at the local level side in South Africa. And we also have other issues that we can look at. For example, in Tanzania has drafted urban development and management policy to support local government to plan and implement actions to deal with impacts of climate change. And this was also this was also talked about by Shemdo and Kasanga and Bulegwe in 2015. So it's like still integrating climate change into development plans is still struggling because of several factors. We'll be going deep into these factors, and we'll see, because it's very difficult for this. So even in one part, I even made it clear that the fact that a country has a national policy to deal with climate change does not mean that it will sink down there, and the integration is going to come, because at the local level, they are still struggling with so many challenges that is making it very difficult for them to do the integration at the local level. And okay, so we look into the integration issues, and we also we can talk about what is happening in Cameroon, the presence of community development plans in Cameroon to assess the sensitivity, exposure and resilience of livelihoods in health and road infrastructure, agriculture, and other things. So we also see that Cameroon is also another country that is also doing, to some extent, let me say, they're also doing very well, because it's like their system is said that they have, as I think I even said it, that they have a central body, and then they have even an organization or something, which is a collective of chiefs within the local area, and they fight, they more or less fight against climate change within their communities. So it's the integration to them to some extent it's going on well, and they also so the integration is to more extent, I think, is going on well over there, because of this, the chiefs and other local people, and even local farmers or community also coming together to work on climate change issues. So let's go to societal mobilization. We have some issues of what I've discussed already. Some of them are here. So let's first of all take the South African one. I can't pronounce it very well. So it's like the municipal adaptation plan, which we call the MAP, which is happening in South Africa. And this is, well, this particular model it's using the local people very well in trying to bring in community stakeholders and other things, bringing them on board in planning for climate change adaptation, and also involving them in climate change adaptation. Also, as I said, Cameroon traditional rulers against climate change is also another powerful model, which is also working very well in Cameroon to deal with climate change issues, where chiefs and those things are also involved in this particular issue. And we can also talk about Republic of South Africa as placed in what Coits in 2014 talked about in the Biodiversity Act, which is 10 of 2004. And we see that South Africa, they've made, within that policy, they've made provision for stakeholder engagement or consultations in these things. But to more extent, I cannot talk about whether this policy is really happening on ground. But at the end of the day, like, the policy encourage societal mobilization, the stakeholder involvement in these things. So and the same way Kanzi also talked about, which they did a lot on Cameroon, and they also talked about the involvement of media and other influential stuff that for the other countries, I couldn't find things like this, and it was very difficult to. So I was only able to work on these areas. And the last was climate change governance learning. And this one was a big problem in almost all the country. And I think South Africa was the one which was even to some extent doing well in this particular area. But however, it was even found out that there was no monitoring, evaluation, and those things to actually assess the governance issues of climate change. Now we come to the barriers, the problems that militating or fighting against climate change, fighting against the fight against climate impact and those things. So let's look into that. We put them into two areas: the cognitive or the individual barriers, and we also look into the barriers from regulatory / institutional issues. And I also looked into other aspects, which were the other barriers that I saw from the works. So what I saw is that let's look into the first one, the cognitive and individual barriers. We saw that lack of understanding of climate change adaptation. Even the local government themselves, it was very difficult for them to even understand climate change very well. So how do you deal with climate change if you yourself do not have the understanding of the term or the concept and how it's even moving on? If it's not clear, you don't have people who understand these things, it becomes difficult. And also local government lack the capacity to measure, predict, respond, and mainstream climate adaptation into local development plans. They are also struggling. So we saw the case of Ghana, this guy said it. We also saw the case in South Africa, some people said it. And even Cameroon and South Africa, they are the ones that we to some more extent, we can say that they are doing very well in these areas, but even they have been listed here, South Africa and Cameroon listed here are even struggling to even integrate climate and into local plans. So that the issue of education or something is very, very important, or getting people with knowledge at the local level to help these local governments will be very, very important. And also there was also an issue of lack of expertise on the local level or a technical person to handle climate change issues at the local level, which was also very, very, it was also problematic in that we needed like, if we say this, we're trying to talk about people who are knowledgeable, who understand climate change, maybe experts in climate change who are employed and given a special office at the local level to coordinate activities of the various departments. And that was also a challenge. And also an inadequate number of extension officers, especially those dealing with agricultural related adaptations for the agri sector. You know, some people, for example, in Ghana, they were using, Yakubu mentioned of issues on Ghana, and they are using the field, they are using the extension officers, but some places
Dr.
even
Chris, Dr. Chris,
Hello?
may I request you to kindly conclude?
Okay. So in conclusion, I'm trying to say that climate change issues, when it comes to local government responses, it's very weak in Africa because we have identified so many areas that needs to be addressed, especially the training and also the policy issues and also financial issues are very important in dealing with these things. So these are my references, and thank you very much. Some of my references. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sure that there will be many questions because climate change in Africa is actually becoming extremely important in terms of the challenges which the countries in Africa have been facing. And we're very happy that this is a joint presentation from Botswana, from South Africa, and from Ghana. And you also made several references to Cameroon. And I hope that there will be many questions which will be coming up in the chat. And so request you to kindly stay on. If there are any questions from the delegates who are attending online or in person, can you kindly mention that in the chat or in the Q&A so that then we can take up these questions. I would also like to mention that Dr. Roman Tandlich is one of the co-authors of the paper, the full paper, which is getting prepared along with this, along with Dr. Chris and also their colleague from Ghana. And Dr. Roman Tandlich is one of the associate professors in Rhodes University, and he'll be hosting the next year's TIEMS annual conference in South Africa. So I would also strongly encourage all those of you who are interested in the development problems in Africa to kindly register as members of the International Emergency Management Society and look forward to participating in the next year's annual conference. Any questions or any comments, please? Dr. Roman, would you also like to say something?
Thank you very much. I do want to suggest that we have started a collaboration with Chris. This is our first joint paper, but we have worked on a special issue together for some of the team's researchers. That special issue will be published in the next month or two in a journal that I will circulate via the team's mailing list. We are also looking to collaborate together with Chris and other colleagues of his in Botswana on preparing the next conference, which will be in South Africa. We are going to try and put a SADC and African perspective on it. So Chris and Stanley Ehiane, who presented on Monday, are both part of the program and the scientific committee for our conference next year. And climate change, I agree with you, Prof, is a very important topic. There is a lot of research going on in South Africa into sustainability implications, and most pressing challenges that we currently face are energy production. So I will be quite keen to hear what yourself, Prof, and Dr. Chawla have to say about the power supply interruptions that South Africa is a very well-documented study site for, because we've been experiencing it for so long that there is plenty of data to model and develop new strategies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure that this will be another opportunity for collaboration between the various professional networks, professional chapters of TIEMS to really look at the ongoing work and also the critical gaps in terms of research and development.
I think there is a question in the QA box.
There's one question about when the tentative dates for the annual conference 2023 will be announced for South Africa for the TIEMS annual conference 2023. That is addressed to Dr. Roman. And the next question is, yes, please go ahead.
Yes, I think we still need to finalize the dates, but it will be sometime between September and November 2023. We will have to have a discussion in the committee and with the board of directors of TIEMS to finalize the dates, but that should be done before the end of November this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we are having tentatively a discussion about a possible board meeting either next week or the week after that. And then, we will be discussing about, we take a review of the current annual conference in the US and also take up, a few more issues in terms of the next year's annual conference. And Kyle, would you like to answer this question about when the next annual conference will be held?
There was a question which was talking about a collaboration among countries. In the review, we didn't see any. I think it's a good step, but in the review, even internal collaboration is even difficult. So we can't even talk about cross-border collaboration, but that would be a perfect issue because climate change doesn't know boundaries. So it just happens. So there is a need for cross-border issues. To be dealing with that. Thank you very much.
Yes, in fact, actually, I think in the COP27, which is going to be held in Egypt soon, there is a discussion about setting up a US $2 billion fund to look at the restoring the restoration and regeneration of land in Africa. And, by 2030, and there is also another work on the water in African cities because the water scarcity is also becoming very challenging in many cities. So I think there are several initiatives which are being proposed.